Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we are going to paint a jar of berries. One of my good friends took me out to lunch yesterday and we saw these berries in various places growing in bogs next to the road. So we actually clipped some and I thought it'd make a really nice painting. I also wanted to let you know that this photo will be up on my blog, so you can print it out, you can look at it, you could trace it if you wanted to. I've already got it here on my watercolor paper. I also wanted to let you know that I have a brand new course that just launched today called Hand Painted Holiday, and there are 4 different card designs, and each of the card designs come with a pattern if you want to trace it. It is for all levels, and it's a fun, relaxing holiday project if you want to do some hand-painted Christmas cards and also tags, because I think tags are just wonderful for warming up before you begin a day of painting. So if that's interesting to you, I will link that down below and also put a coupon code in it so you can get 50% off. Now this is a mini class, meaning it's about half the size of my normal courses. It's also half the price of my normal courses. So full price on this course is $39, but I'll have a coupon code so you can get it for $19.50 if you are so interested. So we're going to start off. You can use whatever watercolors you have here. Also, if you have any questions on that course, you can let me know in the comments below and I'd be more than happy to help you out. So I actually have the still life set up in front of me on a little shelf that's right at eye level, and that's how I took this photo at eye level as well. The only thing I didn't like about my photo, because I took this downstairs at my photography area, is that I don't have a really distinct shadow. I don't have a really distinct shadow in front of me either, but there is a little bit of a shadow behind. So what I want to do is actually wet the background and get some of the shadow in. And then it will give us a bit of it'll give us a little bit of an atmosphere, so we're not just on plain white paper. I'm just going to dust off my paper because I think I got some crumbs from my still life on it, and I just want to make sure I don't have any of that in there. And I'm just going to use a big brush to wet my paper. You could also use a spray bottle. That would work just fine. And I think we'll probably start off by using our ultramarine blue burnt sienna combo to make our nice shadows. And we'll also want to use some kind of brighter colors. I think I'll probably use a little bit of phthalo blue, and if you have cobalt teal, you can use it. If you don't, you can omit it. I just like the atmosphere and the texture of that color, but if you don't have it, don't worry about it. The colors I am using today are from Paul Rubens. They have this new set here that has a very interesting, actually, that's a really pretty color that I might get in the mix, but you can use whatever you want. And I also want to let you know that on my new class, we're using a very limited palette, and if you have watercolors, it's guaranteed you have everything that will work already. And I have affordable options if you're just starting out and you want to make, you just want to try it and you don't want to spend a lot of money, because I want this class to be really accessible for anybody that wants to learn. Okay, so I do want to get a little color everywhere. I love to add, I do like to add a little yellow ochre to sweeten things up. You can do a yellow ochre, a raw sienna, a Naples yellow, whatever you like. I'm just going to kind of put that towards the top of my arrangement, just in the background. In fact, I'm going to use a bigger brush for that. These are the Mimic brushes that I really like. I've been using them a few years. You can find them on Amazon or also at Jerry's Artorama. I recommend looking both places to see if one place has a better price. I also like to, if I have light in the sky, I like to get a little of that in the jar as well, because I find that just it feels like it's catching light and it just gives glass a more luminous quality. And I don't know if you can see my sketch, but I have it very, very lightly sketched on my paper. All right, I want to get some shadows, so I'm going to do ultramarine blue. And can you see, I'm going to scoot this over just a smidgen so you can see my palette a little bit better. I'm working on a block, so I'm just making sure I don't shove it off to the side of the camera here. I'm going to take some burnt sienna and mix it with the ultramarine blue. And you can see if I add more blue, I get a cooler shadow. If I add more brown, I get a warmer shadow, which is nice. And I'm going to have that kind of in the background coming off the jar and kind of just below the jar. I have a very atmospheric light shadow happening because I have so many lights in my studio, but I do have more of a light kind of, if you look at my reference photo here, I have more of a light kind of shining towards like this, so I do get a little bit more of a shadow on the wall behind it over here, and I am getting a little bit of a shadow off each side. So I don't want anything too distinct because because it is such a diffused shadow, but I do want to have something. And I'm doing this flicking because I want this diffused shadow of all the berries that we're going to paint. And I'm just going to pull that in there. Of course, I have a white backdrop, so I probably don't want to have such a smooth transition and have it bend up the wall like that, because if I was looking at a real wall, I would have more of a crease there, so I don't want it to look strange. So I'm just going to kind of pull some of that over there. The paper's wet, so nothing I do is going to stay really distinct, which is good. Now I do want to take a paper towel and just lift some color off of the jar itself, because I don't want to have, I mean, I don't mind having some shadow color in there, but I don't want a lot. You know, it's one of those light bluish green jars, so I want to have some color in there, but I just don't want a ton. And take a little bit more of the ultramarine blue into my gray. Blot my brush off because it's really wet. I want to add a little bit of something over here so it's not stark. So this is kind of the atmospheric toning of the paper. I like to do this because I feel that it just, it looks nicer than having something stark white. And then also it's forgiving if you accidentally, like, you're painting, you drop some paint on your work, you haven't just wasted your whole project. It's not going to be that noticeable. It's going to look like it's part of the scene. And plus I prefer a little bit looser of a style. I like to have that contrast of like the detail between the hard glass and the writing on the glass to a looser background. That's a personal choice, but it's something that I like. Now I also want to get a little more color. I want to get some of the color from the jar in the background as well. And I'm going to try this cobalt teal. It's such a pretty color here. And the thing I like about working with a specialty set sometimes is that you get to experiment a bit with colors you might not have in your basic palette. You don't need to do this if you have phthalo blue. You can add a little bit of phthalo blue if you want to, or Viridian hue. I actually prefer Viridian hue to Viridian because Viridian is so weak in comparison and not as transparent. So now I can see that I've kind of got a puddle over here, so I'm just going to kind of spread that out so I don't end up with a back run in my background. That's when you have like some wetter paint going down on top, and then it gives you that kind of cauliflower look. So now I'm taking some Viridian hue or phthalo green, whatever you have, and I'm adding that with some either Prussian blue or phthalo blue, again, whatever you have, and I'm going to add that in there too. You don't have to do both, you know, if you're using one color you're happy with. I just thought this would be fun because I've had a lot of requests for a little bit more complex tutorials, so I thought it'd be fun to grab some of these other colors and get them in the mix. And then since I will have some of those water jar colors going in the background, I want to get some of that in there. So I'm just adding some, and you can see it's kind of spreading on its own, and I've cleaned and dried my brush off, and now I'm just going to help it a little bit. And I think I'm also going to grab my spray bottle because I want it to diffuse a little bit more, and I'm going to tip my block of paper and just give it a little, I should have filled up my spray bottle, just give it a little spritz. I can also, if I wanted to add any of the colors of the berries to the background and let that color spread around, I could do that too. I can see that in my reference photo, but I think it's because I increased the contrast a little bit and not because of, you know, what's really happening in the colors. So I don't think I'll do that. That will have a crisper look. And now I'm just taking a brush and just wiping off the puddle on the bottom, so I shouldn't end up with any weird cauliflowers that I don't want. All right, I see a little puddle there, so I'm just wiping my brush and pulling that away. Okay, now I'm not too worried about a little bit of color spilling in on the jar because That'll be fine, because usually I have a little thicker and a darker jar on the edge. I'm just going to tip this up a little bit so hopefully you can see it's not a lot of color here. We'll go in and we'll layer on a little more shadow later. I just wanted to get some atmosphere. What I'm going to do is let this dry, and then we'll come back and we'll start painting our focal point. Okay, so I have dried this with my heat tool because I wanted to make sure it was nice and dry. And now what I'm going to do is mix up a color that I want to use for the jar. I'm going to use some phthalo green. I'm going to use some of the either Prussian blue or phthalo blue, whichever you have. And that color on its own is actually really good. I can add a little bit of that cobalt teal if I want. That's up to you. That color has a white in it, so I don't think I'm going to add that in there. And what I'm going to do is do a controlled wash. Now, just got to make sure that you have enough paint to cover your whole area before you begin. And this is going to be fairly light because I plan on building up the color a little bit as need be. I'm going to start by soaking as much as I can up into my brush. And then I am going to start at the top. I actually only need to be able to do this area first because that's what I can see. And I'm going to put in a bead of paint there. Now, this is going to be so light that I'm not going to worry about the stems coming out of the jar because they'll be able to go on top. And I'm just going to work back and forth and make sure that I keep that bead of, I keep my paper tipped and I keep that bead of water there, that bead of color. And I'm just going to work slowly down my, my painting here. Now we've got this bump in the jar. I'm going to go right over that. And I'm not actually going to worry about highlights. I can blot them off as I go, or I can scrub them off later, or because these colors are kind of staining, I can go in with a white gel pen or paint pen or color pencil and add that on. You can, if you absolutely want to have the white of the paper before you begin painting, because I know most of you guys watch these through and then try it on your own. You can do masking fluid if you wanted to, or even wax, like candle wax, on an area that you want to preserve. Now, because that wire going across is going to be dark, I can go right over that. I don't need to watch that. But I do want to make sure I keep a bead of wet right there, because if I don't keep that bead of color as I'm working down in a controlled wash fashion, then it's going to dry out on me. And then when I go to re-add, I could get a back run. So that's why you need to keep the bead of color. You need to make sure you always have that bead of color and add to it before it runs out. And you always want to keep your paper tipped when you're doing a controlled wash, and you want to work back and forth. And this is great if you don't have too complex of a shape. Like this mason jar is perfect for that. If it was something with lots of weird edges that I had to define, that would not be as great because it would be really hard to keep those edges just as you want them. Oops, I just worked back up into that wash. Hopefully that doesn't give me trouble. You really don't want to do that. You want to try to keep your, just keep going side to side. I'm going to add a little bit more to this bead. And the benefit of a wash like this is you just get a very flat, even color, and you don't get as much shift because you haven't pre-wet the paper. So you get a little bit more of like what you see is what you get. Now I get enough between my brush and what's in that bead. I've got enough to finish this up, so I'm not going to add any more. Sometimes you have to go back up and just smooth out that edge, but just try not to disturb your previous layer of paint too much, or your previous row of wash. And then I'm just going to cleanly go across the bottom there. And oops, I went over the edge. I'm going to wipe my brush on a paper towel, and then oops, I picked up a cat fuzzy. Oops, I don't want to tip my paper. I'm going to go in and just pick that up, pick up any leftover puddle. And I am going to just blot with a very dry paper towel what went outside the line there. And see, if we were working on a perfectly white background, that would be a problem because we'd have a little staining and it wouldn't look that great. But you don't have to worry about it so much here because we have that toning in the background. Now, another handy tool to have is a cotton swab for doing berries. You can actually buy berry tools that have like a bigger end, or you can use a pencil eraser, or you can use a paintbrush, but just like a regular old cotton swab works so well for this. So what you want to do is figure out what colors you're going to want for your berries. I have a mixture of, actually I have mostly orangey red berries here. I have a couple different kinds, but that we picked up yesterday, but the ones I liked the most were these orangey looking berries. So what I'm doing is I'm just liquefying my paint in my palette. I'm going to want a little bit of a darker red. I'll just use both of those. Mostly because it's also fun to play with new paints, and I like seeing what the different paints want to do. And I'm going to start off with my Q-tip in the redder color, because I know my first dabs are going to be smaller, because as the Q-tip goes, it gets a little bit swollen, and then you get larger dabs. So I'm going to go in and just do some smaller little berries. Excuse my tummy if it starts growling. And just do a little light pressure. And you can also dab the Q-tip on the dried paint. I like to work, even though this is a tube set, I like to work from dried watercolor, because I find that I can control how concentrated I want it. If I want these little berries to be really dark, I can just, go right to the dry pan, and whatever moisture is on my Q-tip will moisten the berries. And I could use a gel pen for highlights on that, which is really nice. So so this is going to be really easy. I don't want to do these guys here until this is dry. And the berries that are inside the glass that have fallen in the water and are floating and bobbing, I'm going to want to hand paint those, because I do not want those to be perfectly round. They're going to be distorted by the glass and distorted by the water. So I want to make sure that I capture that, because I think it's really interesting looking. And I've been trying to work from my own reference photos more often. And so I think I might try this in oils, because I've been also challenging myself to do 20 oil paintings this month, and I thought that would be a really fun one to do. Okay, now I want some lighter colors, and I think I'll just do the other end of the Q-tip, because I don't want to, I want them to have a little bit of difference. It seems like the bigger berries, they are a little more orange, a little lighter, so I'm not going to reload as often either. And I like to put these in before the stem, because it gives, when I paint the stem, I can paint around the berries, so I don't have like lines going through my berries. Hope that makes sense. And it's perfectly fine with this project to stop and use the heat tool if you want to dry anything, so you don't drag your hands through it, or like when you want to go work here, if that's not dry yet. That will dry quicker than wetting it and applying the paint and doing it that way, because you're only putting as much water as you need. You're not excessively putting a lot of water in there. The nice thing about the Q-tip too is that when you're pressing it, you end up getting a little bit of a shadow where you get a concentration of the paint. So now I'm going to do the orange, and I'm going to get like an edge of that in the red, so I'll get some two-toned berries. Which I think is kind of nice. You get a little variety there. And I would just keep going until they're too pale that you wouldn't want them. That way you'll end up with a nice variety of sizes, you'll end up with a nice variety of coloring, and it'll look more natural. Now imagine painting all these with a brush. Oops, this one wants to shed. I also find that the cheaper Q-tips, like the kinds that you could buy at like a Dollar Tree or dollar store, work a little bit better, because they usually don't have so much fluff. I think this is an actual Q-tip brand, so it's got extra fluff, which is good, because you don't poke yourself in the brain when you try to clean your ears, but not as good for painting. The cheap ones are better for painting. I found that out because I bought some of those dangerous cheap Q-tips before, and I'm like, oh, I don't want anyone using those and hurting themselves, but I'll use them in the craft room. It turned out they were better for painting. I tried to cluster them and not have them evenly spaced out, and I also just kind of go by what I think looks good, so you don't have to go by the reference photo exactly. Go by what you like the look of. And I'm going between like the reference photo and my still life that's set up in front of me, because I don't have it turned. It's really hard not to move things like berries and whatnot as you're going. Now this feels dry up here, so I think I can go ahead and add those guys. And I'm just looking at back up, because I didn't draw all the berries on, I just kind of indicated where they were. So I know I do need to put more than what I have indicated. Now if it gets really like it's shedding and it's giving you like stray marks, then just go ahead and get a fresh Q-tip. Sometimes if you twist it like that, you can kind of stick down any of the little fibers. I think what happens is they get into the pan of paint, and the paint wants to pull them free. Let's see, I have way more in the arrangement than I'm painting, but generally, I find I generally don't like to put quite as many as I see. And I can always put more in later. It's not like this is it. I can put as many as I like later on in the process if I feel like once I get the stem in there that I haven't added enough. I think that's a good place to start. Okay, now just to be safe, I am gonna use my heat tool just for a second and make sure that blue on the jar is dry, because when I go in to put my stems, I don't want to be like lifting up any of that paint underneath. And if that's nice and dry, since I used staining colors, they shouldn't budge when I go over it with my stems. There, I think that's all that needs, just a few seconds. That heat tool is the Ranger heat tool. It works really well if you're looking for something like that. So there's a couple of brushes that I like to use for stems and whatnot. And I've got a number 4 round. I also have a number 2 round, which I don't think I'll need if I have this liner. And I've got this number, I think it's a number 2 liner, which is like a 2 round but with longer bristles. And I like liners because they give you, I'm going to dry those berries while I'm at it. They give you they have longer bristles, so they're harder to control, so they'll give you a more natural looking branch and line. And I think that's really nice, because sometimes you can have the tendency to want to make things too perfect, and when we do that, it takes away a lot of the beauty of nature. So I'm going to take that burnt sienna and I'm going to mix it right into that gray that we started off with, which was a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. The ultramarine blue just takes some of the orange tone out of that paint and makes it look a little bit more natural. And I am going to start by, I guess I'll start by putting in some stems here. I'll start here because, and I can see the bottom, the end of that stem. I don't know if you can't really see it in the reference photo, but I've got the paint, the actual still life right in front of me, so I can see that. So I want to put that, detail in there because I think it's kind of cool. Since that is a thicker part, it's in the water, and those parts in the water are thicker, I'm going to switch to this number 4 round. And I've got the water line indicated, the front part of the water line indicated anyway. So that's really helpful, because then I know that what's below the water line is going to be a little bit thicker and magnified because of what water does, and what's above the water line is going to be a little bit skinnier, and maybe a lot skinnier, depending, like if it's like these edges, this edge here of this stem is kind of touching the front of the vase, so it's I'll grab a little of that yellow ochre there. It's making it bigger because it's closer to the person, but then as it tapers away and pops out of the water, it's a lot smaller. I'm paying no attention to what's printed on the jar right now. Let's see, we got an interesting, it's really cool how this stem kind of comes around. It goes like that. It's got a little start of a branch coming off of it. This for me is like my favorite part to paint, is the stuff that's getting distorted. And let's see, we got this little stem coming off there. And just kind of went upside the line, so I just shoved it back into my finger. This would actually be really pretty in colored pencil too. So if you like this reference photo and you want to try it in another medium, you are more than welcome to. Put it there to share with you guys for that purpose, for the purpose of you creating art that you're proud of and that you're enjoying. And if you want to add like other little like branches or details that aren't there, it's your painting. You can do whatever you want. It's funny, I find that I will take a lot more liberties with watercolor, and then I'll go and try to paint it with like oils, and it's like I have all I can do to just paint what's there in oils. There's, you know, I think you have to get comfortable with a medium to do much with the artistic license, because you just, you know, you got to start by kind of recording the information you see, and then you can go from there. I want to make this a little bit darker, so I'm going to do more of the brown, more of the ultramarine, less water. These stems seem to be a little bit darker as you get up and through here. They're still not going to be quite as dark as the iron piece coming across, but I'll be painting that last, and that will go over everything, so I think that that will be fine. When you get around areas where you've got threads, this is one of those kind of clamp down ones, so you only have like the threads on the top and the thread, this kind of like bump right there. You just want to, you're going to be breaking your line there. You're not going to see as much detail. So I'm going to go back down to this liner brush here, because now we've got some smaller little so you might be like distorted, like kind of you know, like a little bump there. Instead of it going straight, you're getting that line is getting bent. And if you just see a bent line, you can go ahead and put it, because it doesn't have to necessarily attach to something. Your brain will know that there's a thicker line there. I just think I love the patterns that the branches make. I think it's so fun. And with your, you know, when you're doing a painting and you say, oh, I wish there was a branch there, or that'd be look prettier if I, you know, because sometimes you're trying to arrange flowers and you're like, I can't get it to look the way I want it to look. I can't get it to go. Like, I can't get my branches of the berries to fill out the way that I want. That's fine. You can do that on your own. You know, you can make that branch go wherever you want it to go. And the more experience you have with painting, the better you're going to get at pushing things like that, being able to compose it, because you'll know how it would look. I gotta make sure I'm sitting up real straight when I'm looking at my still life, because otherwise I'm going to drop down below eye level and it's going to mess up my very small ellipse there. Okay, oh, and I got this little bit of a branch kind of coming up with some berries there, so I've got to indicate that. And I like to do this after the first layer of the of my blue, because then it's going to be within the vase. It's not going to feel like it's out of place. I don't want it to be painted on top of the vase. I want it to be inside the glass. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and add some stems coming out from the opening in the vase, and just kind of attaching to these guys. So I'm just kind of doing these little broken lines. I don't need to put every little detail in there. By varying how much I press on the brush, I can get a different thickness. The liner brush is great because it wants to skip and give me almost like little twisted, gnarly lines, so it just gives it a really natural look for things like branches and twigs. And if you need your lines, you can always make them thicker. So if you're looking and you're like, it's too spindly, you can always go back in with a wider brush that you've got a little more control with, and you can add those thicker elements. I like to go thin to thick because you can always add thicker ones for stuff like this, for little branches and whatnot. These are pretty hardy looking branches, really. You can like attach in some of the individual berries if you want to. You certainly don't have to, because your brain will fill that stuff in. Now I'm going to go in with the wider brush and just fill in want some more substantial stalks here. I think I need something. This looks like it just needs... I'll put some more berries in there later, but I just like, I just need something. And I do feel like I need that. That just should be a little bit darker, so I'm going in a little bit darker paint. Because there's nothing between your eyes and these stems like there was on the stuff in the glass. You have no distortion. You've got what's actually coming out, and I got to make sure that I've got things coming out on the edge of that lip and not coming out from behind the glass. It's got to be coming out from the center of that very tiny ellipse, which is the opening of the jar. Okay, I think that's all right. Now I also want to get those little berries on the inside, and I'm going to use this number 4 round because it's got a more of a blunt round than a pointed round tip. And I'm just going to use either of those colors that I had been using. They'll be a little bit lighter because I'm not like stamping them down. I think they'll be a little bit lighter from this brush. And I am just going to go and paint them in. And if they feel too dark, then I can... So this one, you've got this berry. It's like big underneath the ellipse and it's tiny on top of the waterline. I can blot it quickly with a rag if I feel like I've gotten it too dark, but I think it's going to be fine. This one's pressed up against the glass. This one over here attached to a branch. Man, those things fall everywhere. When I was trying to arrange this this still life, those berries were going everywhere. I'm looking at both my reference photo and my still life setup for this because the my arrangement changed a little bit between the two, and I like that I can see a little bit more of the berries in the photo than I can just sitting at my table here. I've got to kind of sit up tall. I'm going to put one up here because I can see that. I can see that in my still life. I don't see it in the photo as much. And then I can take, I can distort a little bit on the waterline. Probably should have gone with a smaller brush for that. I can add any of this orange as reflections in any of the threads of the jar as well. And because I've painted a lot of glass, sometimes I'll take some liberties and add some extra because even though I don't see any in this bump, I like it and I'm going to put it in there. Okay, so now I want to start working on some of the detail in the glass, and I'm going to switch to a number 2 round. Hopefully it's not hiding on me like it did last time. And I'm going to grab some of the phthalo blue and some of the phthalo green. And I eventually will add some of the burnt umber to the burnt sienna to that because I will need a darker color, but I don't want to do that yet because I want to keep a little bit of a place where I can go darker. I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to start at the bottom of the jar. Try to move this over without knocking anything off of my small table. There we go. And now the thickness of the jar is a little uneven, and I want to show that. I think that looks kind of cool how the thickness of the jar on the bottom is. It's kind of uneven. There's even a little air bubble in the glass. Ooh, I've got a little, if you've ever gotten, I don't know if you can even see this, if you've ever got, like, sometimes after you've using a brush for a long time, you'll get like a little oddball on the end. Just like a little, it's a little hook. And I have had students comment that that's happened to them before, and that happened to me with this little brush here, so I just, I meant to do that off camera, but I had forgotten to. So I just snip off. If you've got one of those little, you've been using it for a while, sometimes a hair will come, it'll start to come loose. It's not really loose because it's still attached in the ferrule really well, but you've got this really kind of like crazy straggly hair on the end that wants to, you know, go sideways like a crazy eyebrow or something and mess you up. You can just snip that. That's not going to hurt anything. All right, now there's a, I don't know if I can, let's see if I can do this without messing it up. There's a neat seam on the edge of the jar I want to put in, and I'm just going to see if I can see it really good in my reference photo. I'm going to see if I can add it in. Use your brush straight up and down when you're doing something like this. If you have to stop and move your hand, then pick it up elsewhere. So you're just kind of giving the hint of it. Oh, I like that. I think that's pretty. And oh, I got a nice shadow on the edge. I do tend to jump around a little bit. Oh, good, that was in frame. And I was like, oh, I should make sure that's in frame before I get too crazy doing anything here. You want to make sure you have enough water on your brush that you're going to get kind of harder edged lines, because it doesn't, I mean, you don't get as much blending on glass. You get more harder edges. You get more like reflections. And that looks really weird, but it is a little distorted in there. I'm going to turn my whole picture sideways. I can't do that with a still life, but I can because I have that photo in front of me. So set my photo sideways here and hold on to my, yeah, because I can see that I've got this really interesting refraction here that's making the waterline look really high. I think it's because, I wonder if that jar, no, the jar is round. Sometimes you get these, I'm just touching reaching out to feel the jar. The jar is round. Sometimes you get those weird, kind of like squared off mason jars, and then they like cast all sorts of weird shapes and angles and stuff. But this one's actually a round one, but it is giving me like a weird, you see that, how it almost looks like the water line is like square? And the light is weird. Glass is weird, it does weird stuff. And I'm just going to drag some of those colors up because that distortion does look a little strange. And I like to turn my, I'm going to zoom out because I'm turning this all over the place. I do like to turn my work as I go because I like to have my brush pointed out towards the outside of the glass, so I can get a nice crisp edge when I need it. Otherwise, I sometimes end up with these bumpy edges that don't look very good. Do a little bit of dark, and I'll kind of lift and press my brush a little bit so I get those uneven, thin, thick edges that look really glassy, I think. Watercolor is so nice for this because you can keep building up your shadows. All right, I'm going to keep on working with the same color. It seems to be working really well. It's kind of dark in here, so I want to glaze over this. I could switch to a larger brush. The nice thing about a smaller one is that you can't, it's not going to hold so much that you can't really get yourself into too much trouble with it. And when I go up here along the top edge, I'm just going to go on the front side of the glass, not the back side, so that you can see a little bit of difference, because it's not a lot of space there to show it. But I do like that I can see a little bit of the, like this is the front edge, that's the back edge back there. I like that I can see a little bit of that difference, and I want to make sure I don't cover it up. I want to accentuate that little bubble in the glass where the wire is going to come out. It's too bad I can't see the wording here. It's on the opposite side. but it says like something bale on it. Wire bale maybe. It says something, I can't remember what. And I don't want to turn around my still life on my shelf and have it like lose any more berries. Okay, now I get a little bit more of that blue and green. There's a little bit of a line there, and there's a line like that. I'm seeing more interesting shadows on my photo than I am in real life right now because of, I guess, how the light was downstairs when I took it. I'm going to switch to my larger flat because I want some kind of swaths of color. So what I'll do is I'm loading up my brush here. I'll scooch everything back over again, so hopefully you can see a little bit better. I'm loading this up, but this is way more paint than I need. So what I do is I'll just kind of dab off the belly of the brush so that chisel end is still staying together. It's still got the paint there, but it's not going to like drop this huge load of paint where I don't want it to. And then I can just give it a tone below the waterline to give it a little bit of a depth of color, showing that there's water. It's not just a glass, but you have the water magnifying things as well. And you can use that chisel edge to shore up an edge if you've got a wonky edge. You can just, I've just got that paint on the chisel edge, and I'm just tapping along the edge of the jar so it can feed it in a little bit. And if I'm going to pull across any shapes, I'm going to go with the contour of the jar so it helps give it a rounded appearance. Ooh, I love painting glass. It's so fun. Okay, so I want to let some of that dry. I wonder if it's dry up here. Oh, it's dry enough up there. I can do some more layering. So we're going to go back to our number 2 round. We're going to take our phthalo blue. We're going to take our green. That's, you know what, that's pretty dark on its own. I don't think I need to add anything to it. We'll see how it looks. If it looks too vibrant, then we can add the umber to it, or the burnt sienna rather, to it to tone it down. We'll just see. I like to get an edge and then press my brush in there and then lift as I bring it over, and it helps give me that kind of like thin, thick refraction. I think that's going to be alright. I don't think that's too bright. And then I'm just kind of looking as I go and seeing where do I see these concentrated little slices of color. And getting these little bends in where there's changes in the glass shape is really effective. Turn your paper if you need to, so you don't end up getting some lopsided weird design. And I will say, the reference photo, at least printed out on, I just printed mine on cheap paper, it does look a lot darker than it is in real life. The jar is not as dark in real life. That's still a little wet. I want to add a little bit, I want to do the lettering too with this color, but I can't yet because it's still too wet down there, so I can still fuss around up here. You know what, I'm just not gonna like ignore that wire and paint over it because it's gonna be darker. I'm gonna paint it darker anyway. Now at the water line, I'm gonna turn my paper just because I want to make sure that I don't wiggle my edge. Nice dark color here. I want to get that front edge, which is pretty accurate. The back edge is so distorted that I don't really want to accentuate anything there because I think it may end up looking really bad and weird. I think the bottom is dry enough for me to just get that edge a little crisper. little thin and thick lines there just to give it a little bit of randomness. It's feeling like that side wasn't the same as that side, so I was squaring it off a little bit. Just throwing in any little details that I see. Now, of course, you can go in with colored pencil later, and you can do more of that if you want to. I'm going to hit this real quick with the heat tool in where I have the letters, because I want to go and put some lettering on next. Okay, I've dried this, and I've turned it a little bit so that I can kind of rest my hand in the dry area and have it a little more comfortable. And with the lettering, you want to just kind of stop and start. You just really, it's clear, so you're just painting the those slices of reflections that you see. So on this B here, I can barely see my pencil, which is all right. I'm just kind of picking up the areas that I can see. And hoping for the best, really, because I can't really see my sketch at all much, but that's all right. You don't need to. You don't need to have a lot of it on there. You just need a little, just a little hint of it. And then the word ideal down here. Oh boy, let's see, I can see where I put the D. Is that in, oh good, it's in the camera. Yeah, you'll definitely want to either open the reference photo up on your computer and make it big so you can see the detail, or print it out to have this be enjoyable, I think, as far as a painting subject. Or go, if you have a mason jar at home, if you have any of these berries growing around your house, that would be excellent. Just go and get your own reference photo so that you can actually get close to it and see what you're working with, because I'm looking at my actual still life as much as I am the photograph that I took. And I'm noticing that a lot when I'm working with my own photographs, which I have been this month, more than usual, is that, let's see, there's like a pattern thing in here, but it's really difficult to make out, so I don't really want to, add a lot of detail to it. So I'm really enjoying that, because I find that there's a lot of details that you just don't see in photographs. At least if you take the photo, even if you don't rely on it that much, you have experienced it, and you will remember what you'll remember a lot of more details about it, just because you experienced it in person. And often, if you've taken the time to take the photo, you have some sort of like visceral feeling about it. Oops, that was too dry. I'm not getting the smooth look that I want, so I'm just going in with some water. I'm just adjusting some colors here. Wow, this is going to be a long tutorial. I hope you guys like it. I hope it's not a little much. At least in the new class, all the tutorials are short and, you know, very approachable, very easy to, you know, pick up and go and do a project when you have half an hour, 20 minutes, there's even some shorter ones on there. Oh shoot, I just went in the background. So I'm either gonna make that part of my shadow, my reflection, or just I'll try scrubbing some of it off. It would help if I cleaned my brush better before I did that. but I'm actually going to put a little bit of color in the background coming off of that, so I'm not worried about it. In fact, I think I ought to do that right now. I want to have a little bit of like, just a little bit of a glow back there. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to wet the background. In fact, let me grab that flat brush. Hopefully, let me blot it on my paper towel, make sure it's relatively clean. Pretty good. But since I do have some toning in the background, it's not a big deal. I'm going to just wet back here a little bit. I'm going to pull back that water further than where I'm going to actually apply paint so it just can diffuse out. I'm going to do a couple colors. I'm going to do a little bit of that yellow ochre color, which honestly, I got to tell you, I think I actually picked up, it was Naples Yellow Deep I've been using the whole time, but I think that's all right because I kept sticking with it. I didn't like switch. And add a little bit of that inside the glass water area too. Then I'll grab my blue-green mix that we were using and add that in as well. Take my flat and just kind of let it diffuse out a little bit. You gotta have a little bit more, I'm not even in camera, there we go. We're gonna have a little bit more concentration and crisp edge next to the jar, so I just want to get some of that in there. We'll lift out a little bit of a brighter spot right there where we had that yellow. Clean my brush. So this is kind of a tricky bit here because I do have different, oh shoot. Always make sure there is no water on your paint handle because look what happened. I just dripped a bunch of that in there and I'm going to have to start over, I think. Maybe not. Yes, you got to be careful when you have, and I usually always looking on small brushes, but if you got water on the handle and you're going in to blend something and you drop that water into something you're working on, it can really ruin a painting. And I think I'm lucky that that was just a background and I could blot it up and I could start over, but if that was in like a major, like in the middle of the glass, that could have been really bad. I want some more of that yellow. So basically I'm just redoing what I just did because I dropped paint on there. Sorry about that. But I bet you won't let that happen to you. You'll be like, oh yeah, I don't want to deal with that. I think I want to leave it alone. I think I'm messing with it too much and it's not going to be better if I just keep messing with it. Except I want to mess with it a little bit more and add a little bit more. I feel like I just want a little bit more up here. Man, I have to think a lot in this. I can't talk so much in this tutorial. I have to think so much. There we go. I think I will paint this in oils. I think that'd be really fun. I'll have to see. I have a 6x12 canvas. I think that'd be really pretty in oils. What do you think? You interested in that? I don't know if I'll do a tutorial of it. I haven't been. I'm only going to be filling a few of my oils, I think, because I think sometimes you just need to practice stuff and not worry too much about what other people think of it. And I know a lot of times if I know that I'm doing a tutorial, I'm less likely to experiment because I don't want to waste anybody's time or ruin something or make a big mess of something. You know, I want to show people the right way to do things. And, you know, I don't want to put out bad information, so So I tend not to experiment. I figure out that stuff on my own if it's something I'm not sure about or a new technique. There, I just need a little bit of color over there because of the lighting situation where I have light coming from both sides. And I'm just gonna diffuse a bit with this big brush. Make sure your background's really dry before you go in and start layering on the background, or you're gonna have quite a mess on your hands. Okay, now up here should be pretty dry, so I'm gonna make the thicker color for the iron bale, and I'm gonna do, oops, I got some cotton swab fuzz there. I'm gonna take the burnt sienna. Oh, I'm mixing burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. I'm doing it on my palette, but I want to stay zoomed in because I'm going to be working right in there. And you might as well be able to see it at a little bit more detail. I'm mixing it pretty thick. Like a cream consistency. Like a coffee cream. And I'm using the number 4 because it's less pointy, and I just think having a blunter point for this would be more effective. Oh gosh, I really hope it's dry right there. Seems to be. Sometimes I'll do like a little connect the dot, and I'll put a few, because it can be really hard to see your sketch after you've been, as I'm in frame. I gotta turn it. I gotta pull the stroke towards me or I'm gonna make a mess. It can be helpful if like your sketch lines are really, really light, just to kind of have a place to aim for. So I do that little dot to dot method. It's kind of like when you're sketching and you're like, you don't want to put any dark lines down, so you're just kind of really, really lightly making like kind of like dashed lines. That's kind of the same idea. Now where's the other piece? I can't even see the other part of the metal, which is right just below this lip, kind of tucks in back there and comes across like that. So yeah, it really helps having the still life in front of me because I printed it on cheap printer paper. It's just like copy paper. It's not even a photo paper. It doesn't have a lot of the details, but looking in front of me, I can see that contrast of the jar to the wire part. But I do like using the photo because then I can make colors pop a little bit more. I can play and see what a darker color would look like. I can reach over there. Actually, you know what? Mine is like, I don't know if I moved this. Oh, I think I moved it because I had the wire thing. It wasn't even in the little dimple here. So, that would have looked weird if I painted it like, oh, you know what? And I took a photo of it and the dimple is not where it should be. I mean, the little wire is not connecting where it should be, but I'm going to move it because I'm aware of it. I don't think it'd really stand out that much either way. Now I'm just looking at the thickness of this wire in front because I feel like I've got a little thin in a spot, so I want to even it a little bit. There we go. I like mason jars. These are pretty. Okay, so that's my darkest value, is that iron part. I don't think I want to make the twigs darker on the vase, even though they could be a little bit darker. Or I could do some. I could darken some bits, but not all of it, because I don't want it to look like really like stick figures in there. I want it to be, you can choose. You want to have good values. You want to have darks and lights. You want to have contrast, but you don't want to have everything really dark. You don't want to have everything really light. You don't want everything mid-range. You want to have a variety. So I want to keep some of these branches on the light side, but I could have some of them a little darker. Or at least have some of the edges darker so it gives it more of a round appearance. This one's pretty light, but it actually looks a little bit too transparent. I don't want to do too much crazy stuff because right now I'm on, whatever I put here is going on top of that glass layer. So I want to be really kind of jumpy aroundy with it. Gosh, I hope this video isn't too long. I hope you find it useful. I know that there's been a lot of people asking for more in-depth watercolor tutorials, and I want to provide that on YouTube. I provide a lot of that on Critique Club because people will tend to give me a little bit more allowance for watching longer videos there, because that's what they're there for, is to learn and grow. And I think you guys on YouTube are here to learn and grow as well, but I know that, like, if you know, sometimes like, if I sit down to look on Instagram, I know I'm not going to spend, I'll try not to spend hours, but like, if I'm like logging on to a course or something, or in like a educational school, then I'll be like, oh yeah, I plan on spending some time here. I'm doing that intentionally versus just kind of like passing the time. So, I just want to make sure that I give you guys what you came for. All right, I'm gonna go back to the Q-tip because I want to fill in a little bit more there. I think I do want to get a little bit darker, so I'm gonna go in with the red, and I think I'll actually do a little bit of, I'll be able to wipe off that extra paint out of this palette, don't worry. I'm gonna do a little bit of ultramarine blue, and with that reddish orange color, it's gonna give me a dark, almost wine color. And I'm going to stamp some darker berries in here. They kind of look like they've, I'm going to be careful not to space things out perfectly, evenly, because then it doesn't look good. So just kind of make sure you're as random as you can be. I messed up the end of that Q-tip. I gotta clean that out. I just made a mess with that pan, so I don't wanna let that get like settle into that. I'm gonna zoom out a bit so you can see the whole painting as we're putting these finishing touches on. And I'll just go ahead and get some red out into another part of the palette. I don't wanna spend all day cleaning this when I'm done. Get some of these darker berries in here. Try to put them in so they're kind of getting pushed back. These bushes are so pretty when you see them on the side of the road, and then you think, oh, they look so full, and then you go to like pick some and it's like, oh, that's really not all that full. It's like they're kind of spindly looking. It took me a while to arrange, to figure out how I wanted to paint this, because they were definitely looking more spindly than I thought they would when I picked them. My friend and I were picking these. We're talking about like maybe doing a wreath, but the branches are really chunky, so I don't know if they would really go into a wreath that well. Now I'm going to go with that number 4 round because it's a little on the blunt side. Remember we painted those. We painted the ones in the jar with that, and I think it will just go in. Oops, I got a little drop of water in the background. I just want to lift that up so I don't get a water spot. Go in here and there and just add some color. Now I could do... Look at that. That red's actually quite opaque. I think it's a cadmium red. Cad reds are more opaque. Cad yellows are more opaque. That mineral is just the way the size of the particles makes them sit on top of the paper a little bit more, and it doesn't let the light to block through. It doesn't let the light allow. It doesn't allow. Oh my gosh, I can't talk. It doesn't allow the light to go through and bounce off the paper and then back to your eyes again. So watercolor is usually so beautiful and bright because of that quality. But if you've got a color that doesn't allow that, then you get these heavier colors. So I definitely wanted to use a color that was translucent and clear for the jar, but I can use my yellow ochre, my Naples yellow, my cadmium yellows and cadmium reds and cadmium oranges, things like that in the berries because it's a nice contrast. I'm taking the yellow ochre, which I actually think I picked up Naples yellow, because I'm pretty sure it's Naples yellow, because just looking at it in the pan. But yellow ochre is fine. Use that if that's what you've been using. And I'm adding some highlights on some of these berries. Some of the orange ones especially. You don't need to do it to all of them, because remember where we stamped them with a Q-tip, we got a little bit of highlight and shadow naturally. I'll link up all of the, what I did right there, I wiped the bead of water off my brush. I will link up everything I used in the video description. But, you know, approximate. If you don't have exactly the same color I'm using in the watercolors you have, you know, use what you do have, make do. It's really not, it's not that important that you use the exact same thing. Why do I keep losing that small round #2 brush? I swear I lose that every time I paint. Did I actually put it away? Something tells me probably not. No, I didn't. I don't know what I did with it, but I'm going to just grab this one, which I think is a #2. Yep, this is a #2. And I want to do a little bit more. I want to do some controlled detail with the branches, because I did a lot of that with a liner brush. And it is a really pretty little branch. It kind of comes off. And I love that I can see, it's almost reminds me of like deer antlers. I can see these little nubs coming off the side of the branch, and I just think that's so pretty. So I wanted to get that little branch in. It's nice to have something, I think, that's not perfect. You know, like you think perfectly, you want berries on all the little branches, but if you have one that has nothing on it, I think it's neat, because nature isn't perfect. It's a little more interesting than having it absolutely perfect. Maybe I'll do another one up here. Like the little berries fell off because I was arranging, and they just, you know, they popped off, as they do. This has been a lot of fun to paint. I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but there's a little, on YouTube, there's a little gear on the player, and you can speed through. You can fast forward. You can like watch this twice as fast. So it might fit in your schedule a little bit better. But yeah, I should just start off every video mentioning that. But I've been having a really good time. I hope that you painted along and you enjoyed it. It was a long weekend for us here in the United States. We have Veterans Day on Monday, and if you had a little extra time to paint, I am so glad you spent it with me. That means a lot to me. There's a lot of options in the world right now of things you can do and watch. Okay, and the underside, or I can see in my actual still life, I can see the undersides of those. I just want to get that woody bottom where the things were clipped. Now it's up to you if you want to add anything else to your picture. You can obviously add accents with colored pencils or whatever. And I'm going to let this dry. I think I probably will put some pencil on that, and if I decide to, we'll come back and do it together. Okay, this is dry. Something I wanted to mention is that if I've been using a lot of heavy paints like cadmiums, I will often wash my brushes with some brush soap or some dish soap when I'm done, because often it's hard to get those heavier, thicker pigments out of my brushes. And also sometimes like staining colors like Viridian or Viridian Hue or Phthalo Green can kind of really grab onto the brushes, and it's a good idea so you don't end up with a surprise the next time you go and use them. I'm going to start off with a sharpened white Prismacolor color pencil, because it does tend to be one of my more opaque color pencils. And I'm going in and adding my brightest highlights. Now I can go back in with a gel pen or a white Posca acrylic pen if I find that I want some even brighter highlights, but this is going to give me a really nice starting point. I am using the highlighting, I've got similar enough highlights. I'm looking both at my reference photo and my actual still life in front of me. I'm just seeing where the light is catching on different areas, and I'm just trying to help define define my shapes here. So I want this little highlight underneath the waterline. My pencil has just been sharpened, by the way. You do want a sharp pencil when you're doing these really bright highlights. And the highlight in the waterline, you get one on top of the waterline and below the waterline, so it's really kind of interesting. It's going to be difficult to remove colored pencils, so only put it in if you're sure of where something is. You can, of course, omit this. I think the picture was pretty without it, but I also think it adds just a really nice extra bit of layer. It adds that glossiness. I like it. I'm definitely more of a mixed media artist than a purist these days. And I think it's mostly because I like that I can take the best attributes of different media. Now, something that's funny, I'm noticing like I'm getting bubbles on on the inside of my actual still life I have in front of me, and I don't have that on the other one. So that's kind of interesting that those have formed over the course of me painting this. And sometimes I'll just go and I'll see an area and it's like, yeah, I think there ought to be a highlight there because that's not defined enough, and I'll go in and throw that in. So you can take a little bit of liberty with it. It's your painting. You can have fun with it. Now, if you find you have a weak edge, something that's really handy is to have a pencil that's the color of what you're working on. So this color here, it's called light aqua. This is just about the color that I ended up making the jar. So if I have a weak edge and I need it to be more defined, then I can go in with that, and I can do that. I can now you do want to just be aware that you're going to add some texture when you do that because your paper has texture. So just kind of keep that in mind. You could always use a water-soluble pencil and then like thin it down with water. But that way, if you just want to deepen an area that was a little on the light side, you can do that. Or if you just need to add a little bit of contrast or something, you can get that in there. If you need to strengthen a line, or like here, it's actually, this light aqua has white in it, so it's a little more opaque than your darker pencil. So if you had an area that you wanted a bit of glass, but you wanted to cover up something that was behind it that you don't think you should have been able to see, you can do that with this pencil, which does help quite a bit. I love to use indigo in my shadows. Is that one indigo or black? I like to use indigo because I find that it just is a little softer than black and a little bit cooler, and it just tends to look more natural in a lot of shadows, especially on glass. A lot of times you have a highlight right next to a shadow. And I think colored pencils are such a nice companion to your watercolors because of that. I can put some really dark, like slices of color if I need to, slices of shadow on the lettering here. I'm going to turn this upside down so I can be working against the edge. And what I'll do is I'll turn my reference photo upside down as well. And that way I can see. Sometimes when you paint, even on a block, the paper will warp a little bit, and then you're painting your line and you end up warping, you end up putting a warped line down, which is what I did here. So I can correct that a little bit. And the waterline, I think, would have some of that nice dark in there too. But just make sure your pencil's sharp so you don't end up with a fuzzy, raggedy edge where you don't want it. Oh, you know what? I've also, working upside down I think really helps, because then you stop looking at the subject as a representational thing. You look at it a little bit more abstractly, but you can see what you really have there, which is really helpful, because you're not worrying about drawing a jar. You're trying to actually just draw these shapes as you see them. Okay. If you do find that you want some black, you can absolutely do that. That's up to you. I'm going to add this indigo into the wire. Any place where I feel it needs a little bit more definition. And I can add some into the stems as well, if I feel like I need to darken it up. Like I've got, see how we have all these berries in here? They would block a lot of light and they would make the stems look a lot darker than they are. And we use blue and brown to make that darker brown. So if we just add some of this indigo over it, it's just going to like meld into it. It's not going to do anything weird. It's still going to look natural. So any place you just want it just a touch darker, you can use this. It'll be better than using brown, because brown might be a little bit opaque and it might push on top of the glass and not look like you think it's going to. And then I think I'll just grab this cream pencil and I'll zoom in a little bit, because that way you can see these berries. Berries are small. And I'm just going to, on some of them, give them a little highlight. Just on some, and they're not all going to be on the same side. This is more of like just a little bit of a glow. I'll put it kind of where I've put the Naples yellow. It's not so much a highlight as is it just kind of the yellower side of some of these berries. In fact, I could grab a nice warm yellow pencil for that. That would work pretty well. Probably better than the cream. Cream, a lot of times I use that in place of white if I'm highlighting something that is not a cool object, if I'm highlighting a warm object. The colored pencils, if you've got stem where it shouldn't be, the colored pencils will cover over that. Now they do have little highlights on them. I think white would be fine just to do a little highlight on some of them, but if you find that it's not like sticking very well, you can go in with a gel pen. Because sometimes it can be hard to just deposit a little dash of white, you know, it wants to kind of get it kind of press hard, and then it's hard to get it exactly where you want it, where you can just gel pen it and dab it with your finger and then have just about the right highlight. In fact, I'll do some with pencil, I'll do some with gel pen just to show you the difference. Okay, so now I'll grab this gel pen, make sure it's working. Yep. Okay, so what I'll do is dot, smudge, dot, smudge. And you could probably dot a few. Probably don't have to smudge them all out either. Just to give it that little bit of a sparkle. And I mean, you could spend so much time in the finishing touches because they're so fun. I guess you really wouldn't have a highlight inside the jar there. But, you know, have fun with it. Put on as many as you want. Probably doesn't show up that much on camera anyway. And then for the jar, any of your really bright highlights you can do with the gel pen. Any of your really fine highlights you can. These are the kind of, these are the big ones. These are the ones like if you want to go over, like this is on top of the jar, this is on the outside. So like if you wanted to cover, if you go through, like I can go over the water line there and just get that outside highlight. It just helps give it that really glassy look. And if your gel pen skips, it can actually give it a little bit more of a realistic look even. But I think I'm going to call that done because there's no undo button in art. I think I might overdo it. I do tend to do that. I hope you found this useful, and if so, please give me a thumbs up. If you want to check out my watercolor, my hand-painted holiday class, that is open for enrollment. I'd love to have you in the class. It's a lot of fun. It's a shorter class, less expensive than the typical offerings. So it's a great one if you've been curious about my classes and want to see what they're all about. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy crafting. Okay, I actually decided I wanted to add something to this. I wanted to have, this felt like a little off balance. As I was photographing it, I noticed it, and oftentimes, it's not until I photograph something that I realize that I want to change something. So I'm going to take my Q-tip, get my 2 shades of red, and I'm going to put a couple little berries, because you know how like they fall so easily off of these? I'm like, yeah, why don't I put a couple berries on the table? That makes total sense. So let's see if I can find my little round brush. It turned back up again. I'll just use some burnt sienna, and I'm just gonna put little stem going back there, and I'm gonna give it a little burnt sienna ultramarine blue. Just do a little dab of, you know, the opposite the stem with the little ends of the berries, and then dry this, and we'll put a little shadow on there. And it's just, I just felt like it was so, I just needed something, and I didn't know what it was until I took photos of it, and I was like, you know what, it needs something right here. It needs to have, in fact, I probably should have painted the shadows first, because I could have done the shadows and then stamped over them, and it would have been a lot easier probably, but I think this is going to be fine, because even if a little bit of the reddish orange color goes into the shadows, it will, you know, sometimes when you have shadows, they do that. They have that little bit of cast shadows. So let me take a little bit of ultramarine blue and a little bit of burnt sienna, make myself a little gray. And let's do a little shadow coming out like that. There. We've got this kind of two lighting situation going on it, so I'm just getting the shadows on both sides. I'll clean my brush off, and I'm just going to diffuse those out a little bit. Just to soften them. And I think that'll be a much nicer composition, just having that little bit of extra in the background. And you don't have to worry if your shadows aren't perfect, because we toned the background, so it should look fine. You can even go in, because a lot of times when you have shadows on something, you'll have several little, you know, you'll have different lights that are casting a little bit difference of shadows, and so you can kind of dab on a little bit more and let them diffuse out. And you can add some highlights with colored pencils if you want to after. I just felt like it needed that, and yeah, I just wanted to share that on the video since I decided to go ahead and add that. And if you do have a hard edge that you're having a hard time with and you don't like the way it looks, just go in with a stiffer brush and you can scrub it. Those 2 colors that we use for the shadow are very liftable, so you can go in and soften them if you want to. Alright, that's all. See you next time.